My name is Chris Dugas. I am a senior analytical consultant with Syntelli Solutions. I've been in the Spotfire world for I'm on about 3.5, 4 years now. So that qualifies me as a in-house Spotfire nerd for Syntelli. This was actually a fun kind of exercise for me because usually when I'm speaking to groups about Spotfire, it's usually in a pre-sales process or in a training scenario. So I'm usually only talking to people who know diddly squat about Spotfire. But for you guys, I felt like I kind of had to up my game a little bit. So that was a welcome little challenge, and it was also a good little self discovery exercise for me because a lot of times when we're in the thick of just trying to get our jobs done, we kind of point to what we know works, and we go with that, and we usually manipulate a little bit and deliver, and there we go. So I actually had to go through a little bit of a thought process to go back and go through the things that I know work and kind of discover why it is they do. This is going to start out a little bit of a kind of a preachy, all-encompassing UX design process speech, but I'm probably going to very quickly go into a very in-depth look at as far as some of the techniques that we use to be able to implement the kind of overriding vision of creating UX and a user experience that can benefit our clients and your company. So take a look at my first little page here. Hopefully everybody here is familiar or becoming familiar with Spotfire 7.0. So Spotfire 7.0, they've finally given us a lot more control over some of the just basic styling capabilities that we have available to us. This is kind of a standard template that I've kind of started working with. I don't know how well it's translating, but it's just sort of a dark purple kind of theme, white text on a dark background, which tends to deliver a little bit better. But what we're looking at here, just a sample data set. This is probably pretty familiar to anybody that's worked with Spotfire before. We've got a couple visualizations working. Got our data panel open. We got our filter panel open. Details on demand. When we get started with Spotfire, this is usually a very familiar side to us. We've brought in the data. We've created a couple of visualizations. We're starting to do some discovery. And this is where sort of the challenge begins, right? So the challenge becomes, how do we take our data in its rawest form and deliver a reporting and analytical dashboard that can provide actionable insight to our end users, whoever those end users are, whether they're salesmen, customers, CEOs, CFOs, and everybody in between. That's always sort of the quest whenever we're beginning one of these little dashboards. So this is where we usually start, and I'll just jump over here to, this is sort of the template that I sort of begin with whenever I'm beginning a new dashboard project. Obviously, as I'm sure everybody here knows, there's never been two projects from the same company, let alone different companies, that have ever had the same requirements, ever had the same data design considerations. Everyone is in themselves their own animal, which is sort of the fun of our job, I think. Never get the same problem twice. But this is sort of a starting point that I always like to begin with. And again, the reason I go with this particular template is I know it works. The first time we brought up this template, it was for a pre-sale, delivering to someone who's looking into buying Spotfire. And they really responded to it. So I stuck with it and tweaked it a little bit, kept working with it. And each time we do it in a demo or pre-sales type of setting, it always tended to get a response. So it's just kind of what I stuck with. So like I was saying, for this exercise, I kind of wanted to take a deeper dive into why it is people tend to respond to it. I've sort of broken this down into three different sections. So up here at the top, obviously, we have our KPIs, our key performance indicators. These are our heavy hitters. These are our global metrics. What are the metrics that are most important to you coming out of the data? You're a sales company. You're a manufacturing company. What are the things that matter most to you? Number of units going out the door. Number of hours taken to create those units. The dollar amount of your sales. How many sales you've made. How much money you've made off those sales. How much did you think you were going to sell? How much did you actually sell? The comparison between those two. These are sort of the obvious metrics that, of course, everybody wants to see. And just as a starting point, we kind of start with those guys up here. Over here on the right, this is what I call the report card. It can be the same type of metric, just broken down over your primary category. So when we want to look at sales, our plan versus actual, how do we want to break that down? By what category do we want to take our number of sales, dollar amount of sales? How do we want to slice that up? And it's usually by something pretty generic, like by customer, by plant, by customer, by salesperson, by sales region, right? And this visualization type, this is just a graphical table. So we've got a bullet graph, got some calculated values. Everything's color coded. And then over here, taking up the most real estate over here, this is the time series analysis, right? So going through time, what are our actual sales doing? What are our planned sales doing? So now I've kind of showed you, this is about as hacky a way as you can do it, but this is sort of the before and after, right? So we always start out here. Anytime we start a new project, bringing in data, we start tinkering around with it. And this is where we try to end up, right? Some of the key considerations that purely just my experience has led me to. Whenever I'm starting out a new project, some of the things I know I'm going to want to end up with at the end, if I can. You'll notice just between this page and the following page, no filter panel, no detail on demand panel, no data panel, no panels at all. The biggest challenge whenever we're developing this to be able to deploy to our end users is real estate on the page. How do we get it as least busy as we can make the page? So panels, they're gone. First thing right out. I try not to use any bookmarks. Bookmarks just tend to become more trouble than they're worth at the end of the day. I used to have no title bars on this list. For each individual visualization, I would turn off all the title bars and usually just use a description rather than the title bar. The title bar just, again, ate up a lot of real estate. With the new 7.0 interface, I don't think it's as big of a problem anymore. They've really shrunk down those title bars to where it's a much more manageable size. It's not eating up nearly as much room as it used to. I'm always cleaning up the legends if I'm using them at all. The legends on the visualizations, if I can get away with not using them, I usually try to. More often than not, you're going to run into a need for them at some point. But I always try to clean those up before I deploy for an end user. And I think the biggest consideration, or I think the thing that I'll try to impress to the group at hand is I try to go a lot heavier into using properties and property controls, a lot heavier using the text areas, as opposed to using filter panels, bookmarks, things of that nature. The user experience, at face value, this page is delivering, isn't all that exciting. There's a lot more that this page can do for us than just what we're currently looking at. And that's kind of the ultimate challenge, is how do we deliver all the reporting, all the information that we wanted to be able to deliver to our end users in as few pages as possible. A lot of times we want to be able to build these dashboards out with 10, 20 different tabs. Maybe we provide them some navigation capabilities to go between those tabs. But it's very easy for those end users to get lost when we start going down that road. So whenever I'm starting out, in the back of my head, what I'm always thinking is, how am I going to be able to deliver this in a maximum of 2, maybe 3 pages? Obviously, it doesn't always work out like that, but that's always the challenge. Some of the techniques that I'll try to show you here pretty quickly is how we sort of try to achieve that. And again, it all kind of starts with the text areas and using properties and property controls. And the reason I say no filter panel is, if we can avoid using the filter panel and having it eat up all this space over here on the end, we can use all the same filter elements that come out of those filter panel, but we can actually just put them in the text area itself. So we can use a text area as a combination of a filter panel and a place to house all of our property controls. So so starting out, that's kind of the direction I try to go. Now, obviously, when I'm developing, I'm always going to have this filter panel out so that I can, grab a column if I need to, or just when I'm doing data discovery. But before a final deployment, that's usually a consideration I try to take. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that work here on this particular page, just about everything you see, with the exception of our report card over here, is actually a details visualization. And one tip that I try to give people is, Use detailed visualizations as much as you can. Limit what the property controls and details visualizations are doing is they're limiting your data delivery to your visualizations the same way that a property can, or the same way that a bookmark or a marking or things of that nature might do, but it does it in a much more controlled way. So what I mean by that is usually when we're creating a detailed visualization, we start out with something like a bar chart. We can right click on it, go to create detailed visualization, make a cross table. But this is usually how that starts out, right? So we have a bar chart and then we'll have this blank visualization down here. And it works, not a problem. It works just fine. But again, we have this real estate down here that if we don't have anything marked, this real estate is just totally eaten up and it's not doing anything. So what we're doing over here is all of our KPIs, our line chart, our bar chart, these are all detailed visualizations. And the way I know that is if I go over to my report card and I can click on an individual customer. So all my KPIs, my time series, it's all interactive. Everything's interactive with each other. So I can select an individual customer. I can see my KPIs changing. What I can also do, I can also go down into my time series and I can start selecting individual quarters. So if I want to look at a particular year and see what happens to my KPIs, I have that interaction there as well. Right. The other interaction that we have in play here is obviously our property controls. So right now what we're looking at in our time series and on our report card is the actual number of sales that were created. Using the property control, I can usually cycle that over to the dollar amount of the sales. All right. Same thing down here. I've got another drop down that's allowing us to cycle the date hierarchy over here for our time series. So rather than looking at the quarter, we can look at it by year. We can look at it by month. Now, natively, obviously, when we're working with a time series on an x-axis, Spotfire gives us a handy-dandy little slider down here at the bottom. But one little shortcut that we can have is, especially if we're working with two different visualizations together, and we want to be able to cycle those time hierarchies together without having to manually go back and forth between the two. And clicking on something, we can just attach that. We can attach that to one drop-down selection. So we can look at it by month, quarter, year, day, week. We can continue down that list if we want. But and for those of you that are not familiar with how all that works, it's not nearly as scary as you think it might be. If we go into the properties for our visualization here, we'll take a look at the x-axis, and we'll go to the custom expression here. Now this expression also is not as bad as it looks. Whenever we're on an x-axis, let's go ahead and create a new line chart here just for fun. So here we've got a date. We can come down here and select our date. We can select our year, quarter, month hierarchy. And so now we can see things by the year, by the quarter, by the month. But if we actually go into the custom expression here, we can see that all Spotfire did was it created this expression for us just by virtue of us selecting that particular hierarchy. That user interface is just creating this custom expression for us. And all we've done is we've taken the hierarchy variable, in this case, this variable right here, and we've replaced it with a property value that we're controlling using that drop-down selection. So you'll see right here, this number 2, all this number 2 is doing is saying that on this hierarchy, I want the second level of the hierarchy displayed on the x-axis. So in this case, the second level is the month. We go back into that custom expression, rather than sliding that slider back and forth, we can just change that to a 1, and that'll take us back to quarter. So if we go back to our original page, it's exactly the same thing we're doing here. We go into the properties, the x-axis, take a look at the custom expression. Here's our property that is housing, right now, it's housing the value of 2. And so what that means is if we go into this property control, for this drop-down selection, we can see that when we select month, the value of month when we select it is 2. The value of quarter is 1, the value of year is 0. So these property values are really just variables that are housing these values that are controlled by these property controls.
Okay. Hey, Chris,
Yes.
also add while you're on that screen that there's something that was added, I believe, in 6.0 where you get the resulting expression window, and that will show you
Yes.
what the expression's actually going to look like.
Right.
I know that helps me out a ton because sometimes it needs quotation marks and sometimes it doesn't. And that's helpful to see if they're actually getting compiled or not by the equation.
Yep, absolutely. And we can see a slightly scarier version of this, of exactly what Daniel was talking about. If we go take a look at the second page over here. So rather than just having those variables control individual parts of our expression, we can have them control the entire expression itself, not just a value or a variable within the expression, but we can have the properties house the entire custom expression. So if we want if we want the sum of the sales as one custom expression, but we want the average quantity of sales on a different expression, we can house those in these property controls. And then rather than having, let's just go into the x-axis here. Or we'll go into the y-axis. So here we'll take a look at the y-axis, and we can see. So we've got a case statement wrapped with a sum. So all we're saying is when this column equals actual plus estimate, then give us the value of this property control. So if we scroll down in our list of properties, we can see it right here. So there's our quantity amount property. There's the value. So the value is dollar of sales. If we look down at our resulting expression, we can see it right there. So that's kind of the pathway, is we go from property control with a description, a resulting value, and then a resulting expression of, if we take this and copy it, actually just paste it down there, so we can see what the actual expression would be if we just manually typed it all out. Right? So it's hard to paint the entire picture of how all this is working together in a 20-minute presentation, but like I said, I was going to show you the highest level overview and then the most detailed level overview. But detailed visualizations, I use those very, very heavily. Everything here is a detailed visualization. The bar chart, the line chart, all our KPIs, everything that's up there. The other consideration, it's more of a 7.0 consideration, but and Daniel may speak to this also, but information links are becoming more and more obsolete with some of the other data connection options that we have. So we can start thinking about phasing ourselves away from the need for information links. The other very nice thing about 7.0, when we start getting into these themes and custom themes, one thing that Spotfire allows us to do is, if we have another file sitting somewhere with a theme that we really like and we want to try it on our current dashboard, we can go grab the theme from another file and use it in this one. So what that actually enables us to do is create templates. So if we come in here and we can say import theme from a file. So what I've done is I have just a list of templates I've created, and they're Spotfire files, but I just threw some dummy data into a Spotfire file and created the theme that I wanted. So if I select dark blue here, for example, so now I've got a dark blue theme. So just to quickly demonstrate that we now have these kind of styling templates that we can employ. If you have certain clients or certain departments that have their own color scheme, you can apply those now. And all the way down to the actual layout of the visualizations themselves. You can control the width of the border, the width of the padding between visualizations. There's a lot more controls that Spotfire has given us. It probably doesn't translate too well, but I've actually removed all the borders between my visualizations here, so it gives it kind of a crisper, cleaner look.